In ancient China's misty lowlands, as rival states clashed and alliances shifted, a quiet force emerged, Sun Tzu. His art of war distilled strategy into timeless wisdom. Win without fighting, know your enemy, and master the terrain. Centuries later, his teachings still guide leaders in war, politics, and business. Draw near a gentle scholar and undaunted adventurer. Imagine, if you will, a world unfixed by borders and beset by the clangor of steel. It is dusk in ancient China, the 6th century before our own reckoning, and from across the vast lowlands shrouded in river mist, the cries of soldiers rise and fall like the wind itself, elusive, tragic, insistent. Here, the warring states of Qi, Chu, Wu, and their kin assemble martial hosts so numerous that even the crows fear the sky above their camps. The air swells with the panic of uncertain alliance, the iron scent of fresh blood, and the low grumble of ambition's engine. In this crucible of chaos and ambition, a shadowed figure emerges, Sun Tzu, or more properly, Sun Wu, son of Qi, whose name whispers through corridors of both history and legend. His wisdom, collected in the slender yet indomitable volume of the Art of War, is said to have bent the fate of empires, shaped the thoughts of warlords, and, in time, steered the fortunes of boardroom titans and nation-states alike. Was he a man of flesh and breath, or rather a conjuration of several times and minds, a mythos wrapped in the trappings of conquest? This, dear reader, is a tale best told with a poet's tongue and a historian's discernment, and so we gather, by candles flicker, within these wood-paneled walls to ask, who was Sun Tzu, and why does his shadow remain so long and so strangely instructive? Origins: Sun Tzu amidst the maelstrom of the warring states. Let us begin at the beginning, or as close as history's fractured mirror allows us to glimpse it. The era into which Sun Tzu supposedly strode was one of nearly paralyzing disorder, today called the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE. This was an age not merely of battles but of transformation, one where the Zhou dynasty's grip slackened, and the land became a sprawling board of intrigue and invention. 7 paramount states, Qi, Chu, Yang, Han, Zhao, Wei, and the rising Qin, contended viciously for dominion. Wars erupted with a violence previously unknown. Armies swelled with conscripted peasants, the crossbow and iron sword whispered of fatal innovation, and statecraft trickled from the blooded parchment of failed kings. Yet within this tempest, a quiet revolution occurred. Wars became a science, then almost an art, a domain suitable not merely for brute knights, but philosophers and strategists obsessed with patterns, not heroism. Sun Tzu, whose very existence dances upon a line between certainty and conjecture, is most frequently described, in the authoritative works of Sima Qian and further embroidered by later scholars, as a native son of Qi. His birth is cautiously fixed around 544 BCE, his death at some unmarked moment in the late spring and autumn or early Warring States period, a time when legend blends comfortably with truth. Historians quartered in the comfort of the Han dynasty would later tell us that Sun Wu was forged in a noble family, his grandfather ennobled by the court, his own mind honed through immersion in the classics and personal observation of conflict. The decline of Qi's power and the internecine struggles that racked its court supposedly spurred our protagonist to set forth, first to the realm of Wu, there to take up the dual mantle of sage and, briefly, general. Sun Tzu's ascendance was, if tradition is to be credited, as much a performance as a resume. The notorious tale of the concubines, wherein Sun Tzu, called to prove the efficacy of his methods to King Helu, divided the king's harem into 2 ranks, executed the king's favorites for insubordination, and thereby bent the rest to swift, perfect obedience, serves both as testament to ancient brutality and to a concept of discipline where the general's authority, once granted, is absolute. All, of course, under the somewhat queasy gaze of the sovereign himself, King Helu. It was under Helu's flag that Sun Tzu is said to have orchestrated a daring campaign, leading the Wu state to improbable victory over Chu, itself considered the military colossus of its time. Tales abound of route changes, surprise attacks, the artful use of intelligence and deception to defeat foes of far greater numerical strength. Yet here, as so often, the fog of legend thickens. Sun Tzu's name vanishes from earlier chronicles, unmentioned in records such as the Zhuozhuan, and later generations would justly question whether a single Sun Wu authored such a legacy, or whether, like Homer before him, Sun Tzu is best understood as a convenient vessel for the distilled wisdom of generations. The composition and dating of the art of war itself are subject to similarly ambiguous provenance. The oldest fragments, bamboo slips unearthed in Han-era tombs, suggest a work evolving over centuries, part of a wider lineage of Sun titles that may have included descendants or even unrelated but like-minded strategists. Yet, through all this uncertainty, the core legend persists. A sage commander who distilled the violence of his time into a philosophy at once austere, elegant, and profoundly subversive. Teachings, the waters of strategy, the shape of philosophy. What, then, did Sun Tzu offer the ages? Let us light a lamp and peer into the heart of his teachings, those slender yet inexhaustible verses which, even now, seem to murmur secrets to statesmen, soldiers, and seekers of wisdom alike. The metaphysical canvas, Taoism and the art of paradox. It is impossible to consider Sun Tzu without perceiving the ghost of Taoism drifting through his lines. The world, he intuited, is flux itself. As water has no constant form, so in warfare there are no constant conditions. Water, pliant yet irresistible, formless, yet patient enough to carve through stone, becomes the central metaphor of his text. The general is not a butcher but a scholar of transformation, seeking victory through adaptation, balance, and, above all, harmony with circumstances. Victory, he insists, is not the work of desperate valor but the quiet fruit of understanding cycles and exploiting them. Here Taoism's animating principles become practical tools. To win, one must know the enemy and know yourself, for then victory is assured before the battle is joined. One must become as formless as a whisper, exploiting the empty spaces of an opponent's plans, and never clinging to brute force when a subtle word might suffice. Yet, for all its Taoist fluidity, the art of war is possessed of a cold realism. Sun Tzu's is not a chivalric vision of war. If his kinship with Confucianism is apparent in his concern for governance and discipline, his heart is harder, more mathematical. War, to Sun Tzu, is not a field of honor but of calculus, a matter of vital importance to the state, the province of life and death, the road to survival or ruin. It is mandatory that it be thoroughly studied. The pillars of power, 5 fundaments and 7 calculations. From the first chapter, Sun Tzu sets forth an analytical framework, at once spare and profound, for all who would seek mastery in contest. Moral law, the congruence between ruler and ruled, the ritual of unity. If soldiers do not trust their commander, always, the enterprise founders. Heaven, time, weather, and cosmic patterns, those invisibles that even emperors must heed. Earth, terrain, distances, obstacles, the which must be read, traversed, or cunningly ignored. The commander, wisdom, sincerity, humanity, courage, severity. These qualities in measure form the general. Method and discipline, organization, intelligence, logistics, the nuts and bolts of triumph. These, says Sun Tzu, must be compared and weighed, measured, assessed, calculated, compared, in his elegant chain of logic, before action. Deviate from calculation, and excuses will avail you nothing. Victory without battle, the supreme art. Perhaps Sun Tzu's most paradoxical, and counterintuitively humane, contribution is his unwavering advocacy of winning without fighting. To subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill, he pronounces. The highest realization of war is to defeat the enemy's plans. Next, to disrupt alliances. Only in last resort to face armies in the field, siege cities, or destroy resources. The defeated foe, if possible, ought to be made an ally. Cities should be taken whole, not ravaged. War, by Sun Tzu's telling, is an affair both of patience and of cunning. Deception reigns, all warfare is based on deception. When strong, feign weakness. When near, create the illusion of distance. Tempt, divide, provoke, and attack where the enemy least expects. Do not besiege cities, he cautions, unless all else fails. And never exhaust men and material in protracted campaigns. The best battle is finished before the swords are drawn. These precepts, at once brutal and merciful, have attracted both admiration and censure across the centuries. Critics in imperial China, Confucians especially, deplored the subordination of virtue to expediency. Later Western analysts would debate its cold practicality and the moral ambiguities it presupposes. The art of adaptation, formlessness, fluidity, and the perpetual dance. Sun Tzu's notion of flexibility is endlessly echoed in his chapters. Be formless like water, and your enemy cannot strike. Just as a hawk strikes only at the right moment, so the wise must learn to wait for true advantage. Good warriors do not despise retreat, nor do they cling foolishly to advantageous positions. Adaptability triumphs over rigidity. The concept of qi, momentum or strategic advantage, draws upon the Chinese notion of qi, the intrinsic force that may be gathered and spent. This flexibility extends from large-scale maneuvers to minute psychological detail. The wise commander studies morale, assembling incentives and punishments with a surgeon's care, and always allowing an escape. Do not corner a desperate foe, Sun Tzu warns, for such men become the most dangerous. The many masks of deception. In the cryptic litany of Sun Tzu's 12 methods of military deception, modern readers might find a playbook for asymmetric conflict. Here, deception is not mere trickery but a weaponized element of strategy, a means to unmake the enemy's assumptions, sap morale, and dictate the tempo of engagement. Sun Tzu's approach is not to advocate for the perfidies as an end in itself but as the means by which superior knowledge and preparation may negate even overwhelming strength. In this, his philosophy is at once specific and deeply unsettling. The end is always the defeat of resistance, but the path taken is often hidden, oblique, and shadowy, for victory shapes itself out of the void. Anecdotes and legends. The general as performer and phantom. No candlelit study of Sun Tzu is complete without a foray into the thick brambles of anecdote and myth. The infamous concubines become the surest proof to his contemporaries of the general's resolve, a man ready to lay down princely heads if discipline so demands. Sun Tzu's doctrine that a general, once appointed, owes obedience first to the art and only second to the sovereign, is, if true, radically modern, a hint of the professional commander, the specialist who stands apart from politics. Other tales circulate, particularly around his supposed descendant Sun Bin, whose stratagem besiege Wei to save Zhao became immortalized in the 36 stratagems of Chinese folk wisdom, that the surest way to relieve a siege is often to strike not the besiegers, but the heart of their realm elsewhere. In his victories over Chu, Sun Tzu is said to have discerned hidden animosities within the enemy camp, turning spies into conduits of both information and demoralization. To him is ascribed the ultimate fusion of intelligence and action, of psychological warfare with logistics and terrain awareness. Yet for all the drama, Sun Tzu remains elusive, a shape in mist, his historicity questioned by scholars for centuries, his supposed autobiography more parable than fact. The Zhuozhuan, that sturdy chronicle of the age, says not a word of him. Later discoveries, most notably the Yinquitian slips, suggest a lineage of texts, and the possibility that Sun Tzu, like King Arthur, is as much a vessel for collective aspiration as a singular historical figure. Legacy. From imperial thrones to silicon boardrooms. The reach in ancient and imperial China. Within a generation or two of its composition, the art of war had attained the status of classic, one of the 7 military classics, included in the examination of aspiring generals and mandarins. Its maxims guided the formations of the Qin armies who, led by King Zheng, would extinguish the contending states and realize the First Chinese Empire. The Han Dynasty, too, made Sun Tzu's work required reading. The Battle of Gaixia, which brought the Han to mastery, is said to have followed his tenets to the letter. Through the centuries, the text exerted a strong gravitational pull. The warlord Cao Cao, architect of the Three Kingdoms era, produced extensive commentaries. Generations of martial artists and organizers of Ge-Do schools drew their inspiration from Master Sun, seeking not just victory but the understanding of how best to avoid unnecessary conflict and disorder. The influence across East Asia. If legend holds sway in China, it verges on veneration in Japan. Introduced as early as the 8th century, the art of war became a foundational text for the samurai. Takeda Shingen famously adopted Sun Tzu's maxims: swift as the wind, quiet as the forest, fierce as fire, immovable as the mountain, as his battle standard, and these words would echo in Japanese military doctrine through to the Meiji era. During the Sengo period, warlords such as Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu turned Sun Tzu's lessons to the work of unification. In the 20th century, Admiral T.G. Heihachu's victories over Tsarist Russia in 1905 were, by his own testimony, indebted to Sun Tzu's emphasis on intelligence, surprise, and leverage. Modern military doctrine. It was only after the shattering violence of the 20th century, a world racked by technology and global war, that Western circles fully embraced Sun Tzu's arch-minimalism and emphasis on psychological warfare over mere force. Mao Zedong, in his guerrilla campaigns and later his writings, praised Sun Tzu as the lodestone of communist military doctrine, crediting him with key victories in China's civil wars. Vo Nguyen Giap, architect of Vietnamese victories at Dien Bien Phu and thereafter, held Sun Tzu's work close, teaching its lessons to cadres intent on outlasting and outmaneuvering foreign powers. In the Gulf War of the late 20th century, U.S. generals such as Norman Schwarzkopf and Colin Powell referenced Sun Tzu's truisms regarding speed, surprise, and indirect approach in their operational planning. The United States Marine Corps and other military institutions include the art of war as core reading, and its lessons feature in the curricula of the Army War College and West Point. Yet, as critics in recent years are keen to note, the work's apparent universality also courts misunderstanding, transplanted out of context, its references to deception and the general as arbiter of fate are sometimes at odds with Western traditions of chivalry and moralized warfare. Sun Tzu in the Age of Commerce. If the battlefield is one proving ground, the marketplace is another. The art of war's ascent to the pantheon of business and management literature, particularly in the West, is a marvel of cultural translation. The entrepreneur, equipped with Sun Tzu's axioms, is enjoined to know both the enemy, competitor, and himself, core competency, to seize advantage in the voids of the market, to plan victories through anticipation and flexibility rather than frontal assault. Courses at Harvard and in business schools globally dissect the art of war side by side with the likes of Porter and Drucker. Amazon's expansion has even been read as embracing Sun Tzu's water metaphor, flowing around resistance and seeking voids in the competitive terrain. Nor is that all. Sports coaches, political strategists, and legal scholars have all claimed Sun Tzu's wisdom. From the NFL's Bill Belichick slipping quotations into game prep, to legal treatises on negotiation, the general's ghost walks everywhere, wise and ever so slightly amused. Epilogue: Sun Tzu beside the embers, a reflection for an unsettled age. So, as the last of the candles gutter and the night gathers outside our paneled sanctuary, we are left to ponder what remains, in our age of machines, perpetual contest, and the ever-unfolding chessboard of human ambition, of Sun Tzu's subtle, elusive legacy. He endures because he promises what we most crave: control amid chaos, the hope that the arcane patterns of war and competition can be read by the discerning mind, that with sufficient calculation, we might win before the battle is joined. His doctrines whisper of the limits of brute force, the necessity of all tempered with calculation, the irony that the greatest victories are those invisible to the world. Yet let us not, in the comfort of quotation and summary, mistake Sun Tzu for a benign or even a wholly comprehensible presence. His insistence on formlessness and deception is as challenging as ever, inviting both admiration and moral critique. In a world of weaponized misinformation, relentless competition, and strategic ambiguity, we would do well to remember that for Sun Tzu, war is always tragic, a last resort, not a means of glory. We are left, as in all great tales, with questions. Espionage, digital or otherwise, deception in markets and the great game of nations. Where lies the limit? Does the artful avoidance of battle make for peace, or only quieter forms of conflict? Sun Tzu, spectre of history, offers no pronouncement. Only the invitation: victorious warriors win first, then go to war. Defeated warriors go to war first, then seek to win. May each generation dare to seek the formless path, and know, as Sun Tzu did, that wisdom is ever water, slipping through the iron fingers of certainty, shaping and shaped by all it touches. Thus ends our tale, fit for scholar and adventurer alike. A tale of mist, iron, and the eternal dance of mind and fate.